Hey guys, coming at you with another video here. This is going to be about early summer patterns for bass at Lake the Ozarks. You basically have a lot of fish that are going to be transitioning to the main lake areas. It's a lot of fun. You can get on some big schools and you can catch a lot of fish and some big ones. And you're also going to have some fish that stick around in the coves, things like that, and are more focused on the bluegill spawn. So I'll talk about both of those, but let's get right into it. So I'll focus on the main lake bite first. And as far as breaking the lake down into sections, I don't think it really matters all that much this time of the year. The lake sets up really good all the way around for main lake style fishing. The only thing you really need to keep in mind is that usually the fish up the river are going to be a little bit further ahead of, say, the fish at the dam. And it kind of seems, like I've said before in other videos, kind of seems to work its way down through the lake. So if they're really starting to get on the points and stuff out here, they might not totally be there at the dam. They're generally a little bit behind. But once things really get in the swing of it and the fish really start transitioning out there, take your pick of the area you want to fish, mostly just based on water clarity or boat traffic, whatever you want to do. The first thing I want to talk about is the thermocline, why it's important and why you should pay attention to it and how it can actually help you eliminate some water. All right, so here's a graphic. I'm going to try and explain all of this without getting too technical. But basically, as the water heats up and summer goes on, you're going to begin to see it stratify into different layers. We all know that cold water is denser than warm water, so that is basically the reason of why this sets up, and it'll also go into the fall turnover when we get to that point. But you have your warm water on top that's going to be full of life. You're going to have phytoplankton, fish swimming around, all of that, and you're going to have light penetrating down to the thermocline area. Now, the thermocline area is a rapid change in temperature from your surface temperature to your lower layer of colder, denser water. Below your thermocline, the water is cold and dense and generally becomes more lifeless as the summer goes on. Now, there can be oxygen below the thermocline in situations and circumstances and earlier on through the year, but as things progress in the summer and you get phytoplankton and things like that and other fish and things dying and sinking down into the bottom layer and they start decomposing, basically they start eating up the oxygen and then the fish there's not enough oxygen to be suitable for life in most cases. So that is basically a general explanation of the thermocline, and you basically need to know that the fish really like to hang out around the level of the thermocline or above it. It seems really around it because you get that cooler water, you get good oxygen, so it's what they need. And the shad also are hanging around that, and that's in turn why the bass are there. So that is a graphic of it. Now you're gonna probably ask, well, how do I know how deep the thermocline is gonna be? And that is based on basically water clarity in the easiest way to explain it. So you need sunlight to penetrate into the water in order to have phytoplankton, in order to have oxygen being produced and life to live. So if you're in a lake like the Ozarks, you might see a thermocline around 20, 25 feet, maybe a little bit deeper in clear parts if it's a clear year, water clarity. But if you go, say, just Table Rock for an example, you may see a thermocline there 50 feet or even 60 feet in cases. It also depends, totally on water clarity. But basically, the cleaner the water, the deeper the thermocline can be, which means the fish can suspend at a much greater depth. That's why you can go to Table Rock in the summer and drop shot the tops of trees, down 40, 50, 60 foot and catch fish. Or like the Ozarks, you're generally not going to do that. Now with electronics, you can find the thermocline pretty easy. I prefer 2D, doesn't matter what brand you have. This is an example from what looks like a Humminbird, but basically all you're going to do is turn up your sensitivity until you start to see this line forming here. And that is going to be your thermocline. So your fish are going to be relating right around that line or just a little bit above it. So in this case, it looks like it's 40 feet, which is a little deep for Lake the Ozarks. But just say at Lake the Ozarks, you saw this line forming at around 20 or 25 feet. You can then go straight to your mapping and you can go find things that are in that range, and say the 25 to 20 foot range or something. So you could find points like this, look for areas in this range, look for brush pile and additional structures in that range, and then that's water you've eliminated fishing deeper than that. So that is something that you need to pay attention to. Like I said, early in the summer, it doesn't matter all that much. It usually hasn't begun to stratify that much. And it also depends on how much current they run. I think a couple years ago they ran current like the whole summer like crazy, and a thermocline never really set up because they were just running so much water through it. It was like a river, and the lake basically never had time to stratify into different layers. So you can Google Bagnell Dam generation, and it'll actually show how much they're generating per hour. I think the max is like 36,000 cubic feet per second or something like that. So if they're generating like around 20,000, generating pretty good, and if they're generating around 30,000, then they're heavily generating, and you're going to have good current through the lake. All right, now that I got the thermocline out of the way, I want to talk about two other things first, and that is shad and current. So remember, as far as shad goes, you're going to have some fish that are still going into pockets and doing a shad spawn late at night, early in the morning. As the sun comes up, they're going to come back out into the deeper water. And as the water temperature warms up, the shad spawn will kind of die off. So you're basically going to be looking out on all of your main lake points and things that stick out and look any different. There's so many different places you can fish and so many different places that these fish can go. It's pretty crazy. This is a good time to utilize your electronics and spend time graphing if you can, to find bigger schools of bass before you start making casts. So basically, you have nice drop-offs here, little flat spots, looking for brush piles, things like that. Over here, you got a nice big flat point that comes out. Drops off into another large flat that looks a little bit deeper water, but then you have docks around that can suspend under those. There's all sorts of things, and your shad are basically going to be out in these main lake areas near the points or any type of humps, things like that. And they're basically just going to be out in the current, eating, and then the bass are going to be right behind them doing the same thing. So now, as far as current goes, you're basically going to have two different types. You're going to have your wind current and dam generated current. So I'll first talk about wind current really quick. All right, so as far as the wind goes, I'm going to be fishing the main lake points that has a wind crashing directly into it first. That is going to allow the phytoplankton to be blown up onto the bank, position the shad, position the bass better, make them easier to catch. As far as the dam generation goes, if they're generating power, think of this as a river. So you're going to think, in this case, water would be flowing from west to east. In this case, it would kind of be flowing from south to north. Here, in this section, it would be from east to west. So just kind of think of it as a river. As they open this up and start generating water, it's basically going to start sucking the water basically through the lake and turn it into a river. You need to think how that is going to affect the position of the fish throughout the lake on different points. When you pull up to a point, they're not all going to be the same because it's kind of dependent upon the angle that they are in the water and how the water would be flowing across it. I will kind of use this here first as an example of what I'm talking about. So you have water coming this way. You can see this point sticks out a little bit. It drops off into the main river channel. So you have water flowing through here. You're basically going to have water hitting the front side of this point and kind of coming off and going down, maybe rolling over the top a little bit as well. But on the back side, you're generally going to have a little bit more slack water, or even possibly like a little bit of an eddy there. So you need to pay attention when you're fishing or graphing of where you're seeing the fish position. For example, here on the front, when they're really in the current, these fish may bite a deep diving crankbait really well, or a flutter spoon or something, a little bit more aggressive type bait, very good. Where back here, they might not eat that as well. You might have to resort to more of a shaky head or a jig or something like that. And the same thing goes for the top. But you basically need to try all those things and cycle through your baits and see if you're getting bites. And you also need to vary the angle of your approach. So if I pulled up on this point here, I may start here, cast over, and bring the bait would be with the current and see if you get any bites. Say you graph a school and you find fish here, I'm going to first throw a spoon or a deep diving crankbait. If they're not biting it, then I'm going to resort to a shaky head or a jig or a swim bait or something like that. But then say I'm going to set my boat here and cast over this way, bring it over this nice flat spot. Maybe there's a brush pile or something here. See if I get any bites. Same thing, I'm going to start with a deep diving crankbait or a spoon, more power fishing, and I'm going to work my way into more finesse type approach. And then I'm finally going to fish this back portion. And I may start here and fish and cast this way. I may park my boat out in the deeper water and cast parallel this way. I may park it on top of the flat, bring it up the hill, or park over here and cast all the way over. Basically, you're going to vary your angle, all of your retrieves and things like that until you start getting bites. And then if you can, put that onto another point, say you move here and start doing the same thing, and you say you start catching them on the front side here where you got more current, then I'm going to start hopping down, maybe start here on this little island, catch some, and I'm going to start working my way down and hitting the front sides of these points. So you're basically just trying to narrow down each point into itself and develop a pattern as you go to help you eliminate more water. So this point here that I was talking about is running basically perpendicular to the current. So let's see if I can find one that's running more with the current and use that kind of as an example. So we'll use this here as an example. It kind of sticks out. It's the same thing. You basically have the same mentality, but it is more angled with the current instead of perpendicular. I'm going to approach this in the same way though, as far as moving my boat around and casting at different angles and starting with the power fishing techniques and then working my way into the other more finesse type techniques. Say you do find a school right here and you start catching them really good on a deep diving crankbait. You catch 5 or 6 in a row on it and then all of a sudden they stop biting it. I'm going to pick up a flutter spoon, try that real fast. And then I'm going to pick up a shaky head or a jig and throw that in there. I might try dragging it around. I might try stroking it off the bottom. Basically, anything you can do to try and trigger a strike and keep the school fired up is going to be to your advantage. Once you get them to bite something, you can usually start throwing some other stuff in there and immediately get a few more bites. But then once they kind of get settled down, you might not be able to get any more bites. It'll be time to move on to a new spot. So basically, you're just going to start point hopping and trying to set up a pattern within a pattern throughout the lake. All right, so I'll move on down the lake here to another spot just as a quick example. Same thing with this point, use as an example, say you got current running up this way. So think about what would be the side getting hit with more current versus maybe a little bit of slack current, although this one's kind of at an odd angle. Might not be quite as much on that point, but those are just things to think about. So I'm basically going to be attacking this point, different angles, different baits, and seeing what I'm getting bit on. And then, if I'm catching it in a specific spot, then I'm going to apply that or look for another point that's set up the same as this and go fish that. Let's say you're fishing on a day where they're not generating any current and there's not much wind. So you're thinking, oh boy, what am I going to do? Well, not all hope is lost. You can still catch them, when the conditions are tough like that, but fishing may not be as good, but don't be totally discouraged. So with today's electronics, it's very nice to be able to graph over things and figure out, if there is anything different on that point or anything extra you should look out for. So what I mean by that is any sort of additional cover, whether it's a rock pile or a brush pile or any type of actually hard structure being more of a ledge or a drop off, something like this. So you can see this is kind of flat and it comes out, and then you have really quick contour lines right here. There's probably a little bit of a ledge right here. Like if you graphed over it, you might actually see a significant drop. By significant, it might only be 2 foot, but sometimes that's little subtle things like that is all you need to get a lot of fish positioned on that, where you could drag a shaky head or something right to the lip of that, and then kind of pop it off, let it float down, and get a lot of bites, or position your boat over here and cast your crankbait deep and let it run up and hit that lip and then stop and pause it, and then they'll kind of come off that edge and hit it. Now as far as your brush piles go, let's kind of use this point bluff end as an example here. So say you got a brush pile out here on this little bit of a flat and it's 15 foot of water. So you got you're pulling up, you got your crankbait, you're going to fire that thing out there past it, and you're going to be bringing your crankbait back. A lot of people are kind of scared, I feel like, to throw crankbaits in brush piles because, boy, you think that's just going to totally get hung up. But you'd be surprised, actually, what you can get through on a crankbait as long as you don't just reel it totally into it, like you crash into it, but then you pause and you kind of let your crankbait suspend, float up a little bit, and a lot of times that's when you're going to get your bite. It works really easy with live scope. You can watch your crankbait come in, or if you have 360 or something, and you can really narrow in on your brush piles. But if you don't have that and you're just kind of out there blind casting, fan casting around, you just want to be in tune with your crankbait. You want to try and have your rod kind of pointed at it or off just slightly so you can really feel the wobbles, and oftentimes you can feel your line actually kind of getting into the brush pile, and it'll kind of change the feel of your crankbait a little bit, and you're getting close, and then you can really feel the resistance as you get close to the brush pile. So when you kind of get to that, just let pause and then start reeling some more, and oftentimes you'll get bites right there. And then the same thing applies, if you're fishing a shaky head or a jig or something, throw it out there, kind of drag it on the sides of it, drag it in it, pop your bait up through it. If you're fishing a Texas rig worm or something, drag that thing right up through the center of it, kind of let it sit in the branches, maybe shake it a little bit. So that's pretty much the gist of the main lake bite. You're going to be looking at your water clarity, your current, wind, and then as it gets a little bit later and the thermocline gets set up, you're looking for points. You're looking for that hard structure that is in that thermocline range. Now, one other thing I do want to talk about, this is a super obvious example here, and it's literally right outside PB2. You see people fish this all the time because they oftentimes release fish from tournaments at PB2, and sometimes they go to these humps and stuff. So this is a hump. There are other humps on Lake the Ozarks. If you look through the mapping, I'll kind of let you do that. They are a little bit hidden sometimes. If you have like Lake Master or something where you can use a depth highlight, they're way easier to find than like on this where the colors are very similar and you really got to kind of poke through. This is just a high spot. You can see it's a 60 feet over here and 40 feet over here, and it comes up to 22 feet. So another great example, oftentimes they're going to have rock piles and things on this. So I go about these the same as a point, say the thermocline's around 25 feet, this would be a great area right around that 22 foot. There can be fish stacked up on here, especially with the release boats and stuff. But, that's just an example of a hump that you could fish. So attack those basically as a point. And, just step back from where you are, where you want to fish, and, focus on where the current is, if they're generating, or where the wind is. And then, take time to graph and start to try and just put your pattern together. Don't get overwhelmed because, there are so many points. And you may have to fish, 10 points and get a few bites on each one, or a few on every other or every couple points. And then, you start putting your puzzle together and you start to figure them out. And then sometimes you might fish 10 points and you can just catch a handful here or there, and then you pull up to one other point that is really set up the same as kind of the others of what you figured out, but there just happens to be a whole bunch on that point. Sometimes they just get stacked up on one spot and you find the holy grail, and you can go out there and just have a ton of fun. Obviously, Lake the Ozarks gets very busy, so you fish main lake in the morning, boat traffic starts to get bad, it gets crazy, wavy, and you're like, oh man, I can't deal with these waves anymore, or the traffic. I still want to fish though. How else can I catch fish? So, it's not just the main lake. You're still going to have fish that are around docks and in these secondary points, things like that, in these coves. So there's still plenty of fish to be caught off the main lake. The things I'm looking for here are secondary points with busted up rock or brush piles. Same thing, you can run your deep diving crankbaits through because these points back here are plenty deep enough. They got plenty deep water, so you can basically run the same thing as some of these main lake points, just back here in these coves and a little bit more protected water. So looking for brush, rock piles, things like that. And then as far as docks go, I'm looking for anything to set these docks apart. I'm looking for docks on secondary points. I'm looking for docks with brush piles. Graph around them, see what you find. Look for bass boats on the lifts, rod holders on the docks. Those are obvious signs of a fisherman, or crappie cages, little fish cleaning tables, and you're often going to find brush around those. So I'm looking at usually throwing a jig or some sort of plastic like a Zoom brush hog or a Senko or a shaky head, and around the docks I'm basically going to focus on trying to put that bait when the sun's high into the darkest area of that dock. The darkest shade I can find in there is what I'm going to look for, and you're going to be trying to pattern that as well. So say you fish your row of docks towards the back here and you get some bites, then I might hop over to this one and start working on some of these docks here closer to the back, and you're going to pay attention to the depth that you're catching them in. So say you're catching them, we'll just use this here as an example. Say you're catching them behind the docks in 10 foot of water. Well, I'm going to go try and find more docks set up in the same depth and do that. But you may also be catching them on the front of the docks here in 18 feet of water. So I'm going to be looking for that as well. And maybe brush is the factor. A lot of times brush is on the outside corners of these docks. So say you're looking for the docks in 18 foot of water with brush. That's kind of your pattern. Start running with that, and maybe you can fine tune it a little bit more. But that's generally just going to be kind of covering water and figuring things out from there. Another thing with the docks is the wind. So say you got wind coming in here out of the north and it's hitting these docks. That's a great scenario because you got the sun's high, midday. Later in the day, it's high. It's in the south, maybe the southwest a little bit. So you're going to have a little bit more shade kind of on the north side of the docks, plus the wind coming in. So that helps position the fish a little bit. You can even throw swim jigs around it, dye the tails, chartreuse, things like that, make it imitate bluegill. So those are basically ways I like to go about fishing when it does get crazy busy and you don't want to fight the traffic anymore and you just want to, kind of stay in the coves and stay protected a little bit and not have to fight everybody. There's still plenty of ways to catch fish. Basically just flipping those docks, brush piles around them. And you can go back into these shallow areas and find laydowns and things like that. They're not as prominent though in this part of the lake. I think if you go up the river more, you're going to find more of that. Or down in the Nangwa, you can find a little bit more natural cover, where the rest of the portions, minus, if you go way back here in the glaze too, you'll find it. But the rest of this portion of the lake, you're mostly fishing docks and things like that. So those are just some little tips to do. And next we'll go over the baits. Now I'll go over the baits I like to use to go after these post-spawn fish. So you basically have two different types. You have the fish that are gonna kind of stay where they were in the coves and things like that, more resident fish. They're going to stay around docks. They're mostly going to be focusing on the bluegill spawn throughout the summer and things like that. And then you're going to have the fish that are going to follow the majority of the shad out deep to the main lake areas, humps, points, and they're going to relate a lot more to the current and just the main lake type structure. So the first thing I'll start with is your topwater. So classic buzz bait I like to use. If you're targeting more of the resident style fish, buzzbait's great around shallow areas, laydowns, overhanging brush, behind docks, sides of docks, things like that. But you can also use a popper, a spook, whopper plopper, any of those things work. And don't be afraid to throw topwater either early in the morning on main lake type stuff. Get up on the big busted up rocks, real early when the sun is still very low. And store topwater, and you can still catch fish like that. All right, now as far as the baits I'm going to use to target the fish on the main lake, you're basically going to have a cycle of baits, is what I like to call it. So I'll start with some crankbaits. So classic crankbaits, 6XDs, 10XDs, 8XDs, any other brand you want to throw. These are both Strike King 6XDs, Sexy Shad, and then just black and chartreuse. This is a 6th Sense Cloud. I don't know if it's a 25. I can't remember. These, you can see the profile difference. These are quite a bit bigger than the 6XD, but they're probably about similar to a 10XD in profile as far as that goes. Now, I've talked about before, with your crankbaits, you can go with rattles. Like those all have rattles. You can go with the silent options. And mix up the profile, sizes, colors. Basically just mix things up until you figure out what's working. The biggest thing I can tell you though with them is you want to be in contact with something. You either want to be in contact with the bottom. So if you're fishing in 20 foot of water, you want a bait. I prefer a bait that runs 25 feet. So I'm hitting the bottom as far as I can go through my cast. You're making long casts and then you're starting and stopping with your retrieve. You don't really just reel the whole time. You can, but I like to reel, start, stop, mix it up. When I bump into something, I stop, let it float up a little bit. A big thing is brush piles here out on the main lake. You can cast past it, especially with live scope or 360. It makes it a lot easier. Find your brush pile. So cast past it, you bring your crankbait down, you can feel your line coming through the brush pile and kind of getting close. You can see it on live scope if you have that. You can see your crankbait coming down and getting to it. I like to pause it and then let it float up just a little bit. And a lot of times that's when you're going to get a bite from those fish, or just when you're ramming into the pile, that kind of gets the reaction strike going and gets them moving. Now, when I go to a spot, I normally say I graph over it, I find a school of fish. First thing I'm going to do is try and get the reaction bite. I'm going to throw a crankbait or something that's a fast moving bait to get them reacted. And then I'm going to keep throwing it in there once you catch one, kind of get them fired up. But now if they stop, then you're going to pick up and go to, like a shaky head or a jig. So I'll go to the shaky head here. So Magnum trick worm is basically my favorite worm to throw. You can throw like a Strike King bullworm, green pumpkin, black and blue. This is June bug. And then pair it with whatever favorite shaky head you like. This is just a custom one, 3/4 ounce here. It's another custom one, just a 1/2 ounce. Generally, I try to go with the lightest head I can get away with, that I can still have good bottom contact and know exactly what my bait is doing. I feel like the 3/4 get stuck a little bit easier in the rocks. The 1/2 ounce, you don't get stuck as much, or a 5/8, whatever you want to throw. But that's really a personal preference to you. You know, you can throw a little bit further with a 3/4, but just the weight of the worm and a 1/2 ounce jig head, you got plenty of weight to throw that nice and far. You can drag these slowly on the bottom, rip them off the bottom, almost like you're fishing a spoon a little bit. And then, so say I throw the crankbait, then I throw the shaky head, maybe catch a few fish with that before I leave the spot. Next thing I'm gonna go for is a football jig. Same thing. These are just some colors I like to throw. So this is a green pumpkin and brown with a little bit of green tinsel in there. This is just almost like an Okeechobee crawl type color is what they would call it, I guess. These are all jigs I just tie myself. So green pumpkin with a little bit of blue. I pair them with, this is a Zoom, I think a super speed crawl maybe, or ultra vibe crawl. I also use a lot of the rage tails or the rage craws, the bigger profile. You can put a Zoom brush hog on there. Same thing, mix up your profiles, see if they want the bigger profile or if they want the bait that's trimmed down with a little bit shorter trailer. You can stroke the jig, jump it off the bottom, let it fall, just keep stroking it like that, almost like a spoon. You can drag it real slow, same thing as a shaky head. Sometimes you can swim it and catch them like that. You know, when you get them active and stuff, usually they bite the jig pretty good. So another thing you can throw is just a curly tail worm. Texas rig this, run it through brush piles. You can throw it on the bottom, hop it, same thing, let it fall down. The tail a lot of times is good action on it. You can Carolina rig this, you can Carolina rig really any of these plastic baits. These are all just right. You have a ton of options. It's really what you want to throw out here on the main lake to get some bites. Now, a few other things you can throw. A spoon, just toss this out, rip it off the bottom, let it flutter back down, rip it off the bottom, let it flutter back down. That's something that I feel like is not quite as popular at the lake, so it's maybe a little bit different thing, you know, that the fish don't see a bunch. Glide baits, people have gotten really big into glide baits in the last couple of years. Throw those around, match them to gizzard shad, catch them. Something else when the fish get a little bit more suspended, swim baits, just soft swim baits, Kitex. This is just a white. This is a shad color. It's purple with the silver, and then this is classic bluegill flash. All great colors, like the Ozarks. I normally am pairing those with a 3/8, no lighter than a 3/8. Usually when I'm fishing main lake, all the way up to a 3/4. So here's an example of a 3/8 ounce head. You can put a little super glue on there to help you, and then this is a 3/4 ounce head. See how much bigger that is. It really just depends on the depth. You know, if there's a thermocline, how much current they've been running. You know, if your thermocline's deeper, 25 feet or something like that, in that range, you know, sometimes a 3/4 ounce head's good. You can throw it out there past the lips, off like the ledges on some of these points and stuff, and bring it across real slow, right on the bottom, just barely touching the bottom, and get bites. Those are basically what I'm gonna throw for your fish out on the main lake. Hello there, Bernie. Now, if you're gonna be fishing the docks or more resident type fish, lay downs, things like that, I'm basically gonna keep it pretty simple with a shaky head, a jig, and be skipping jigs a lot into the docks in the darkest areas you can find. You know, as the sun gets higher, all the way back in the darkest areas. If you got a little bit of wind, you know, maybe focus on the windy side. If the wind and the shade are all on the same side, that can always be good. And that's basically my other pattern through the summer with post spawn and stuff, is just targeting those docks. Look for maybe secondary points, things like that, and other brush piles within the coves on secondary points around the docks. Anything that helps break up the monotony of all the different docks is a great area to catch the fish. Little Ned Rig, if you want to catch a bunch of numbers, this can do it. Even don't be afraid to throw this out on the main lake either. If you just put a little bit bigger head, this is a 1/4 ounce head. You can throw that 20 foot of water pretty easy, as long as it's not crazy windy or crazy wavy and still feel. Put it on a spinning reel. And don't be afraid to throw this around the docks and anything like that either. And you'll catch fish, and you can catch some sizable fish on the Ned Rig, but you'll definitely catch a lot of numbers. So if you're ever hurting for that, don't be afraid to downsize your profile to this little fella here, and it'll help you catch more fish. Put them in the boat, at least if you're having a real tough time. So hopefully that helps you understand the post spawn a little bit when the fish really transition out to the main lake area, and help you catch some more fish. Like I said, you don't have to go out and chase those fish. There's definitely going to be fish in the coves and things like that, but a big number of fish do go out to these points and humps and stuff, and it is a ton of fun when you get out there and start cranking on them or throwing jigs and shaky heads, and you really get into a good school. You know, you can catch a lot in a hurry, and you can catch some real big ones too. So good luck out there, and stay tuned for some more videos. Thanks for watching, guys.